Still regarding a little bit about acts and facts, and specifically about how facts are too imprecise, too inconclusive compared to acts to actually say that facts have a visible future. I am, and I'm sure you'll agree, we'll pretend that you went ahead and decided for us, to mention something else that seems to be of supreme interest to humanity along these lines. But beforehand, may I comment that this has nothing to do with any ordinary religious, spiritual ideas, but it in fact is closer to some unknown form of electro-biomechanics regarding systems of a neural nature, systems of a genetic nature, unknown, unplotted, unscheduled, no schematics available, damn little suspicion that they might exist. But it gets reflected in ways having to do with the very thing of notions that the future can be predicted, that there could be a future. Such a precise, thoroughly enlightening introduction, I'm sure will put us on a slippery path. The first step of which, let's put it this way, that although we all established, you established for me, to my satisfaction last time, that facts in a comparative sense can have no visible future. That the only future that facts have in a certain way is to say that facts will produce more facts. Whereas from one view, acts have no future in the sense that they have no past. That the few things that are acts simply are. That you would say if you're going to make any even hit and run temporal reference, you'd have to say facts were, are, and will be, such as sex and food. But you people having convinced me of that, then I can read your minds, and I know I have picked this up. Here is what some of you are now thinking. Me saying you're thinking, being as magnanimous to you as I would be to anyone. Here is what life is thinking about, and some of it actually bled through. That even after having established all of that to your temporary satisfaction, let us now say, note that from any street level view, that there is also no visible future for act-based / purely physical man. For instance, there is right now a very popular ad that's being even turned into satirical fodder on television. And the line goes, "Help! I've fallen and I can't get up." But from a more subversive view, that is not a pitch for some health alarm system. That's a PSA for death. Because act-based man, he falls and I can't get up. So now try and put this in your pipe, down your pants, into your skull, juxtaposed in at least a 4, near 5-dimensional sense, to the fact that facts can have no future, which left acts having the only thing resembling a future, that is them being a permanent anomaly to the temporal flow of time as conceived by man. But now take that and in some way wrestle it to the ground. Of course, I know it's better if you have a mask and a manager, but try and wrestle that thing to the ground or throw it to the ropes for a few minutes until you can catch your breath. And consider that having established all of that, still when you get to not fact-based man, not the secondary world of man, not the world of facts, but the act-based world, temporarily, again, dividing that arbitrarily, artificially, from the simple continuation of the nervous system into this, the fact area, but down at the act area, to take it verbally as being describable as a separate entity, at that level, the idea of a visible future is one of the world's gigantic belief systems. That's when I gave the intro that this has nothing to do with religion or any kind of spiritual attitude of any sort, but notice everyone, whether they were worshiping cats, trees, frogs, their ancestors, throughout the nervous system of humanity are thoughts given to a possible afterlife. But now notice, just from any ordinary view, got nothing to do with religion, it's not an attack, not a support, as all of you know. But just at a very sang-froid level, the physical life of man, a man, if we were dividing him again, a man that had no operational intelligence, he has, if you cut him off here, he has no visible future at any level below that. That is, when he falls, he can't get up. And no amount of whistling or mashing a button is going to help from any visible level. But now note further. Put a real brief comma after that. That was no point whatsoever, by the way. I hate to see anybody even make them look through your eyes like, well, I'll make a mental note of that. That's not really worth much of a mental note, unless you're ordinary, and it's obvious none of you are. But, well, that is that you're concerned about, well, wait a minute. What if the Baptists are wrong? What if the Hindus are wrong? What if my Uncle Fred's wrong about all this? Everybody's wrong about it. But notice this, everybody wants to dance about it. That there is in life the factual concern. And you might note it is factual. It is not act-based. Because without a fact-based world, state within your nervous system, you couldn't have any thoughts pro or con about a possible survival one way or the other. But, remember, that's very brief, just almost shadow comma to press on. That having pointed out that man, from any reasonable view, not any belief, not any hope, not any anything, which we're not discounting that, because that reflects something, as we're getting to, but from any just hard-nosed, everyday view, you know, the Pope, the world's leading rabbi, everybody, no matter how religious, if you ask them, have you ever seen somebody who fell down that got up? So, back to a visible future. Not only do facts apparently have no visible future, they just go on and on and on, that they do not come to some visible conclusion, that it's too abrupt the way facts move. Not only that, then we got to say, playing in this same imaginary ball field, of course this is just spring training, we're not into the season yet, that you also cannot take, strictly speaking, the physical man act-based, and say that he has a physical future, because when he falls down, he does not get up. But now, that was where the little small, perhaps even illusionary comma. But now, further consider if there is some operational validity to all the notions of there being an existence after man's 3D death. And all over the planet, you do not have to be religious, you do not have to have ever heard of any organized religion. All over the planet, the nervous system of man, once it reaches the area to be fact-oriented, which nowadays everyone on this planet, or no one on this planet, I'll put it another way, is immune from such an existence, then they all have some kind of notions. The fact-based world in some way talks to everybody about, boy, I wonder, some kind of notion that there might be an existence, is an existence. The whole, just consider it the question, the idea, the notion of there being existence after apparent 3D death. You would be well within your rights, anyone, to assume that there is, in the kind of bio physics or mechanics behind all that, and that's a reflection of something. So if there was something to the notion of an existence after this 3D death, of falling down and can't get up, might it actually be then, are you ready, might it actually be in the life of facts? Nobody imagines that we're back to cyclone fencing or aqueduct or Belmont. No, 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 no. No. They finish up at the same sea level at which the race started. But if there is some reality that we could talk about, that it would be worthwhile, it's not for me to talk about, that's not the point, of course, but there's some reality behind it that could be profitable to pursue behind all the notions that there might be an existence after the apparent 3D falling down and can't get back up. Might it be in the very thing that we apparently, sometime in the last few hours, discounted, might it be in the world of facts, the fact-based world? Now, none of you are so addicted to the $2 window, surely, that you would go, well, wait a minute, you can't have it both ways. That's why the odds on this sort of thing are so unbelievably out of balance. Because if you believe you can't have it both ways, then sure as hell, you're going right to the $2 window. And they will return at the same level at which they left. Or, put it another way, you and your horsey will fall down, and you will say, but no one will hear it. It will be a whole forest with no ears. And you and your horsey both will fall down, and you'll both go. Of course, your horsey, I guess, will go. Let's take it a little bit further. That still is, there was no point there yet. Do not take that, do not make mental notes like, ooh, this is getting really. Oh, you can, but let's go ahead. Further, after considering that possibility, if there be some possible validity to an existence after the visible 3D death, and if there would be some possible functional use in considering that would be in the fact-based world, then carry it a bit further. And then consider that the only meaningful, functional survival, which, by the way, you could put is a form of movement, but if there would be a survival, it would be movement from one dimensional system to another. Since in the dimensional system here, when I say apparent, you know, well, now we're not talking about an illusion. It's not an illusion that somebody falls down and dies. The 3D level, that's not an illusion. They fall down, they die. They go back to the closer to an, well, not closer, without the electrification, they go back to the cruder form of the elements, or as that great philosopher Pete Chatham, a.k.a. Memphis Slim, said, we all go back to Mother Earth. She eats, and you go back. So it's when I say apparent death, I know that all sorts of spiritual apparent forms in people's own thinking tries to say, well, death's an illusion, etc. At that level, it's not an illusion, is the point. You fall down and you can't get up. That's the visible 3D death. But now, if there is a movement, if there is some existence after that, please note this, what I'm saying, that people do not take into consideration. I know they all have dreams about, well, you go away to heaven or you go away to paradise. Consider this, if there is some survival, what it amounts to is a movement from one dimension to another. I mean, you got no other way to look at it, unless you were still religious and say, well, you die and your body sure stays here, but your soul goes off to be with so-and-so. Or consider it without that if there is a survival, it is a form of movement that you have gone, and I'm saying you now in a very metaphorical sense. Well, I'm not speaking of an individual or somebody's soul and all that. I'm saying if the spark that was your place in the genetic line of succession, if it physically seems to die, can't get up, and if there is some validity to some kind of survival, the survival amounts to a move. Because you have gone, you and whatever the you is gone from one dimension to another. Consider that not important enough to write down. Another comma. Because then, ask yourself this, that if all of that be in any way potentially and meaningfully possible, that there would be not a physical, but some kind of fact-based movement, survival. If there is, would you believe that it's whatever the ordinary old thinking that anyone has now? Could you believe that? Could anybody that followed any of that had, and it's not me winning you over, of course, but if there's anything within your nervous system that smells any familiar aroma that you've never smelt before, and yet it's familiar, then you've got to ask yourself, well, if it is possible that all of the electricity that keeps me going in my own nervous system and everyone else is not absolutely grounded out when I die, that is, when I fall down and can't get up, and 911 can't help, does it just disappear? If so, we've got to call up Newton and Einstein and say, boy, I am the exception to the basic laws of physics because I died and my energy disappeared. So if it didn't disappear, did it get completely grounded out? And then you got to ask yourself, well, is there anything in my particular fact-based self that would be worthy of not being grounded out, of not turning into its baser elements? Is there? And I did that first because if you were non-cynical, of course, you could look upon all of humanity and look at yourself as being, at the ordinary level, a fair reflection thereof. And say, is there anything in the fact-based world of man that is worthy to survive? And that is not any form of cynicism, sarcasm, because everything, you look around and there's some splendid, speaking in a secondary hobby sense, there's some splendid factual activities going on. And we were just all just as tickled with it as we can be. And it's interesting to read about in science magazines and blah, blah, blah. But if the world of facts, the fact-based world, if it, now I'm not just speaking of a human, but on some greater, like a neighborhood or institutional level, if all of humanity died at the level, the situation of the fact-based world of humanity now, would it be worthy to survive? Now you got to listen. You got to think. Not that it's not good now, but if it survived as it is, would it be any good? And the answer, if you want to find this, is no, because the fact-based world does not have a future. If it had a future, it would be dead. You understand? If what you know now, I'll put it crude, if what you know now, when you died, if what you know could survive, forget anything about physical, and just in the crudest sense, but it would be man's thought processes. Would yours, let's say this whole country, your whole neighborhood, your whole general area, would it be worthy to survive? And you could say, yes, because we are the smartest, most intelligent, blah, blah, blah people on the earth. But would it? Because you're missing it. If you say, well, certainly, you're not thinking. Because if that's true, then you could say, wait a minute, what we should be able to do now, or what would be proper to do, if possible, is look, we can cut down on a whole lot of specious or spurious education and people worrying about, if things are so good now, if we had the power in some way, let's try to do it, legislate it maybe. Let's stop everybody from trying to get any smarter. That is, for thoughts to continue to propagate themselves. It's not necessary. We now, where is Voltaire now that he can enjoy himself? We are now in the best of all possible worlds. We don't have to go any further. Tell Candide to sit down and shut up. Do you catch the point? The point is that would be just at the ordinary level. That is just folly itself. You do not want to stop. You cannot stop. If you did stop here, and if it started on a widespread level, it is suicidal. It would be life killing itself at the very area, at least in our dimension, where it's growing. That is through man's intelligence, not his physical body, but through this. Do you follow? Then if surely you see that you do not want to stop. If you could, I don't know why, but if you wanted to stop, the continuation of the fact-based world continuing to just put out itself, that there is nothing conclusive, it never gets stabilized, that the world's greatest fact that just makes people stagger, or some individual somewhere, that is the greatest thought. That thought is the thought. My God, I've found the holy grail of thoughts. It's not true. Not for an ordinary person, not for humanity. All it's going to do is produce a new thought. Not necessarily in that one guy's lifetime. And remember, the one guy's lifetime is just as long as he can perceive it as a new thought. But to him, that's it. But it actually has no predictable future because it's too unstable. Thoughts do not stop. Thoughts are not, they do not stop. They do not become finished products in the same way that sex, again, or eating, for the sake of survival. The way that sex or eating was born, fully developed. The product was, at the 3D level, was a finished piece of work. And so in a sense it has no future, but in a sense it has the only predictable future. That is, it's not going to change. But facts, although the mind at the ordinary level does not perceive it, facts both have no future and have a future. They have no predictable, visible future because you can't depend on it. Sure, you can say, well, it's my idea that so-and-so is going to happen. You know, you can do that, or you can spit in the middle of the highway. Or you can take a nap. Or you can wash the car. Or you can predict the future, factually. It's all the same thing. Do you understand that that would be comparable to thinking, if you're following this, that if there is some quite tangible, unmystical validity in a real functional sense to a survival after man's apparent 3D demise, then it's obvious it's not his body, not just strictly his body. So if it is in the fact-based, and it's going somewhere else, because you can't see the fact-based here either, if it's going to survive, then the question, could it possibly be no more than what is the fact-based reality now? And the highest view, the most magnanimous approach you can take to thought now will not wash if you try and move it to another dimension. No matter how good it is now, if it's going to survive now, then that means it's got a future. And if you're going to say, well, it does have a future as it is now, then what you're saying is it's going to die and then show up somewhere else just like it is. No. That is no future. That is not survival. Let's try and make it personal. Mary, repeat one more time. You make a grave, you misuse it and waste your time thinking this has anything to do with any, which I know it's almost impossible to shake yourself away from, but all ideas already out in the city about life after death and etc. And tied to religion and all kinds of stuff. Try your best, to keep your foot against the door. I know the noise is back there, but it's something else. Take it very individually, that right now, no form of attack on yourself. It's got nothing to do with ego. It's got nothing to do with poor self-image. But right now, you at your best, let's say that at times you are as insightful, that you are as much a neural rebel as anybody on this planet. So at times. So let's take one of those times and let that be the time of your demise. If you died at your best here, is that still how you want to survive? If you were at that moment, if what you carried with you to another dimension, if your fact-based survival was on that basis, are you satisfied? Now, if you're ordinary, you might go, well, what can I say? I would have to be. You're suicidal. Your idea is you're going to get to paradise and still drink yourself into a stupor. I guess that gives a whole new meaning about changing parables and metaphors in the middle of a conversation, doesn't it? You're the kind of person who would show up in heaven, and after a few minutes, if they knew what they're doing, they'd have to take away your shoelaces and tie, because you'd celebrate by killing yourself. The point is to consider is what you've got now in the fact-based world, if all of these ifs were playing, trying to see behind the quite tangible, unreliable, blah, 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 ordinary notions of survival after death, if it is in the genetic line of succession in life, because your genes are the ones that brought this information to you, it wasn't the church, it wasn't some pastor, it wasn't your parents, it is in the genetic makeup of man. You mean as always? God, it's great to have somebody that I can talk to. You talking to me? At the best, is that the way that you want to, if it was possible, that you pop up somewhere, your fact-based self, that you pop up somewhere else? From one view, all you can say is, well, yes, and what choice do I have? That even taking my example, that we let you die at some moment when you are at your most glorious intellectually. Your fact-based self is suddenly on an absolute gigantic roll, and then you go out. And so that you pop up in another dimension at your best. Do you understand that at your best in another dimension? Now, would you right quick forget all that crap? How about right now? There is a survival going on in the neural system now. That is the tricky part. That is the camouflage tick in the great wolf ear of these kinds of discussions. I was trying to make that previous horse trading metaphorical flim-flam, I was trying to make it look good by comparison. I trust I succeeded. All of the ideas of whether fact-based, act-based has a future, then whether there is some validity, some functional validity to the ideas, the notions of a survival after the apparent 3D death. After all of that, then consider that this is going on, that same question is going on in a way that's beyond 3D analysis, I'll grant you, but you should be able to feel it. That is going on inside of you and everybody, but inside of you continually. It is an operational question that has never been put into words, but it is the question as to whether what I am thinking now has a future. You just don't think about it that way. You think about it as, well, I'm getting better, I need to get better, I'm getting smarter, I'm getting dumber. Everything that would fall, for instance, within the clammy grasp and purview, say, of psychology and psychiatry, all of that is on the basis of it trying to, well, it's operating on the basis that the factual-based reality of man has a future, or else you would not try and treat someone. I don't mean that psychiatry is up to some nefarious deeds. Nobody would go seek treatment. But then those that say, well, yes, come to me, I'll help. I'll do my best. It's on the basis that this has a future, or else you wouldn't try to treat yourself. No one would try to treat you. You just don't look at it, but you are talking about survival. You're talking about survival over when you go to a psychiatrist, or when you just sit there and think, as they say, I just take their word for it, that there are people who say, hand me that bottle of Jack Daniels because I got problems. I hate to go into it, but I hear that that's true, that there are people who drink because of that reason. So gives me the willies to think about it. Not me personally, I was talking for some of the rest of it. You understand what you're doing then, to go to a priest, to go to a friend, to go to your mama, to go to a liquor store, to go to a psychiatrist on the basis if I need help. You know what you're saying is, help, I've fallen. You want somebody to help you get up, not physically. You are looking for survival because, in a sense, you have died. And you think there is a future. Yes, there is a future for my factual self, my fact-based self. It is supposed to be that way. But what is the future? You and the psychiatrist in some way may finally come to some sort of agreement, especially if your funds run out, that, well, you're so much better now that you are, as attorneys like to say, you are constructively cured. It's a good thing not many of you can. Advertising is wont to use the term virtually, to say this product will leave your glasses in the washing machine virtually spotless, which means, they don't guarantee it. I guess since ad people, many of them, it not being required that they have postgraduate work, and attorneys, of course, wanting to distance themselves, attorneys came up with the term constructively, which also means, it may not be true. But to say that something is constructively true is like advertising saying it's virtually certain. Every feeling that the nervous system can put out that goes into words, which becomes part of the fact-based reality of man, is in one sense, no matter that you were brought up in the midst of atheists, but in one sense, it is all speaking on the electrical basis, on the matter of survival. But it is somewhere in the cracks between actual act world and fact world. That is, the reality is there, but it does not even have to go into words. Because all you've got to see is those creatures that share this three-dimensional reality with you will fight to the death to survive. Now, don't worry about the creatures, worry about the genetic line of succession of life itself in man without speaking. Wolves, tigers, plants, bees, ants, dirt, if you're quick enough of eye. It is all involved with a fight to survive. Not survive death, because trees do not know anything about death because they can't talk about it. Humans, they talk about it, and it seems that the real question of survival is what? Not survival today. I know it can be pressing, but as long as there's a liquor store or a psychiatrist, most people get by. Or a church or synagogue or something. But they take the long view that the real question of survival is after I fall down and can't get up. Whereas a tree, if it could talk, we're going to take reality right quick and stretch it that it could be true, but it's not, and it's not, but it could be. See? If a tree could talk, a tree got no doubt about survival. All they do is show you its acorns. Assuming you don't blush easily. It might want to tell you, give you a quick course in fertilization. The genes of life itself, the genes of man, they have no question. They do not sit around and debate. Platonic ideas of life after death as opposed to Augustinian ideas. There is no discussion, there's no doubt that if that tree eventually is going to fall and can't get up and doesn't have one of those little beepers, some part of that tree is going to survive. Can you hear that everything that the genes talk about that come out in the factual world of man, the fact-based world, in some way, if you want to see it, and I'm not trying to indicate or hint anything spooky out of the ordinary, or that this is the only thing to think about, but the fact-based world of man talking is in one sense always talking about some form of survival, because it is always talking about growth. It is always talking about change. It is always talking about hobbies. It is always talking about that which is inconclusive, open-ended, too short, too dramatic, too long. The whole thing that facts have no visible, predictable future. That's why they've got a future. If you can glimpse into that, then you can hear not every little word. We don't have to be that silly, do we? About, hey, Bob, what time is it? 5:15. Of course, I can show you that that has something to do with survival. The guy would not be asking what time it is unless he had to get on a bus, get to work, and survive. But then, you don't really get lost. But then, an ordinary intellectual can jump out and say, wait a minute, the guy didn't have a job or he's off work. He didn't want to know that. He was trying to flirt with this guy at the bus stop. Same thing. Or he was just trying to draw attention to himself. He's so nervous, he's the sort that if he's standing around strangers, he always believes that somebody's going to come up and say, do you have a fork? Or that somebody, he's just going to be standing there minding his own business at the bus stop, and somebody's going to walk up and stand next to him for a minute and go, what are you looking at? So, to try and ease the tension beforehand, the guy didn't want to know what time it was. He doesn't have a job. He doesn't have any sex drive. But he just out of nervousness, he turns to the guy and he says, do you know what time it is? Now, you can say, well, that got nothing to do with survival. God, I didn't know I was lecturing to the blind. Sure it does. But anyway, if you can glimpse up under the skirt of the old religious ideas, you can see that almost everything that finally comes into the fact-based world, the speech of man, in some way is connected to survival. But note, not survival of the body. To speak real crudely, and we're running out of time, not in the old sense, well, yes, we'll die and all go to live with Moses' grandfather or with Buddha. Forget the physical. You fall down, you can't get up. You know, don't sue me. Call that company first alarm. So if something gets up, if energy is not lost, if Newton didn't have at all of us, then if something survives, then comfortably speaking, the suggestion be that it's got to be somewhere closer to the fact-based world. Then we're into, well, what would be worthy of survival? Not in a real qualitative sense, not whether your thoughts or some group's thoughts. It'd be anybody's thoughts. That whatever they are now, if they die, that is, they apparently perish here and they move to another dimension, that they do survive. If you're going to say, well, they were so great, mine individually, this whole group of us were so great that yes, we'll be standing in good stead in this new dimension, you're wrong. Because that'd be the same thing as saying, well, I got to tell you the truth, back in 1957, I ran my own intellectual 2-minute mile. So, big deal. And we've been through that. That is not the future of the fact-based world. That is not an intellectual future of anybody. You can't live off that. Nobody can. It will not survive. Putting it crudely, is it worthy to survive? Because you're back then, if you were thinking that way, of taking survival as being the end of something, and in the beginning or something else was the end of whatever the other was. Like we'll all die, and we'll go to paradise, and we'll recognize each other, and we'll all be Arabs or Italians or whatever we are, and we'll all still have the same sexual persuasion, the same taste in food. We want, in other words, you don't have to start all over again. Looked at from one way, can you see that is no description of survival? It is, from a more complex view, that is the best description of non-survival. But notice it sounds like just the opposite, that the world has always been full of, and you don't have to pick on any particular religion, but for people that apparently have very unsophisticated, feral-based religions, almost act-based religions, it's always that we die, but we survive in some way. But the idea of survival is not that, well, we die, and I think that we all come back as diesel engines. It's never that. If you survive, you in some way are still you, and your mama's your mama, and your cousins, your wife, and your children. And it sounds like, what else would you describe survival? Who would be interested in it? Unless if you fall down, you can't get up, and then you pop up somewhere else, over in the other part of the forest, in paradise, in heaven, in Nirvana. The idea is you'll be as you are. But can you hear? That makes every sense in the world. But can you hear for a split second that indeed is not a description of survival? If you can see it, if anything is possible, that is the world's greatest, most detailed, most piercing description of non-survival. Because it's not possible. But that's what it's describing. You don't see the beauty again? You do not see the need for AC operations of electricity at this level. The polarized nature of all human thought. Beyond all of this, still a comma, the suggestion, I guess, that we can use the last few minutes for me to put the suggestion into words for you, that if there is something worthy of survival, Not that it won't all survive in some way, but speaking in the way that where your own personal efforts during these few years of pain and sorrow, that if your own individual efforts are going to pay off in some way, then you've got to ask yourself this question. If you do see that the ordinary level of whatever you and everyone else might be factually is not worthy, cannot be the consideration of a real revolutionist, that, well, boy, if I survive, all my efforts will have paid off because, boy, I can see right now I'm smarter than everybody around me, which, you're in trouble already. But, boy, when I show up in paradise, finally the gods will go, oh, yeah, you remember, boy, you were almost, you were getting so good there. We almost called you up here, years ago. But, hey, you come over here, we're going to make you a straw boss. We're going to change your name to Buford and let you be in charge. No, you'll be just as dumb as everybody else. Of course, if you ever think what I'm saying now, you're as dumb as everyone else now. You just got a glibber tongue when it's only you listening. But back to, if it was going to be worthwhile, the suggestion, the suspicion, I think, was to assume all of you already thought yourself, that it's going to have to be some sort of, for you personally, it's going to have to be some sort of fresh, unlimited, non-conclusive, non-focused kind of new thinking in you if it's going to be worthy, if you're going to have a future. Either that or you're stuck with everybody else. Not physically. You are stuck with the level of, if indeed it happens in that way, some kind of fact-based survival, that there is a movement of the fact base, which you could say is a level of consciousness, a level of intelligence of humanity, and if it goes into another dimension, I would guess all of you assume that I'm saying up. Could go down. At any rate, it goes somewhere. It disappeared. What is worthy to survive for you individually? You can't affect the rest of it. Well, you might consider, how about a quick spin on a whole bunch of old ideas? How about the old thing about old wine and new bottles? How about a man considered now, though, speaking about a fact-based man, a factual-based man, the whole idea that a man must in some way die before he can actually live? Or the real good one, how about the old one all the way from Eastern religions, Northern religions, Southern religions to American folk music, that the child is father to the man? That was some folk singer on dope. Might have been. But there is a reality behind all of that. It'd be some kind of extraordinary reversal of the ordinary sequential, taking the child being father to the man. It is a obviously extraordinary interference or reversal of the sequential flow, where facts follow acts, and where facts may not have a visible future and can only produce other facts. Finale. In spite of it all, what if, in spite of it all, in spite of life running at its most mechanical, minimal level in speed, in spite of all that, what if it is the real revolutionist who is the actual and factual winner? What if it is somebody engaged in this that is actually, individually, the dominant survivor of it all, of life running as it should at its absolute minimal, most efficient, which is mechanical, automatic level? What if in spite of it all, it's the revolutionist that comes out? Stay tuned.